updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And JD Vance, appearing at CPAC this week, reiterated the point that he made at the Munich Security Conference last week about shared values with respect to our Western European allies. And if the Western European allies in question behave like it has been documented they behave, do we really have shared values anymore? This was the point he was attempting to drive home, and for which he received much pushback, but he's not backing down.
Well, look, obviously, we're going to continue to have important alliances with Europe, but I really do think the strength of those alliances is going to depend on whether we take our societies in the right direction. Think about this. Germany's entire defense is subsidized by the American taxpayer. There are thousands upon thousands of American troops in Germany today. Do you think that the American taxpayer is going to stand for that if you get thrown in jail in Germany for posting a mean tweet? Of course they're not, right? So the point that I try to make to our European friends, and I think that they're our friends, I believe that, I know President Trump does, is that friendship is based on shared values. You do not have shared values if you're jailing people for saying we should close down our border. You don't have shared values if you cancel elections because you don't like the result, and that happened in Romania. You do not have shared values if you're so afraid of your own people that you silence them and shut them up. So let's have shared values. Let's defend democracy. Let's have free expression, not just in the United States, but all over the Western world. That is the path to strong alliances in Europe.
Hear, hear. For more on this, please be joined by Dominic Green, columnist for the Washington Examiner, contributor to the Wall Street Journal, and fellow of the Royal Historical Society. Dominic, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hello, Dan. Hello, Amy.
The Europeans are still smarting from the tongue lashing they received at the hands of JD Vance last week?
Oh, yeah, they're really upset. And, of course, nothing hurts more than the truth. They,
right.
On an extended free ride. I remember it was Barack Obama who complained about free riders in Europe. So this is a long-term issue. This is not something that suddenly appeared overnight. For 30 years, since the end of the Cold War, the Europeans have massively reduced their spending on defense, directed the money towards welfare, and expected the United States to provide an umbrella of security. And at the same time, they have pushed for the expansion of the European Union and the expansion of NATO, again, assuming that the United States would provide the umbrella. And the war in Ukraine has, of course, caused a terrible crisis in these relations. And what Vance said to them, I think, is the most important speech given since Ronald Reagan went to Berlin in 1987 and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. We're in a different era, and it's very important that everybody involved understands that, because the Europeans are acting as if it's still 1990.
So do you think Vice President Vance issued a call to arms?
Yes, a call to the Europeans, to the European people as well as their leaders. Obviously, their leaders made a big fuss, and they used words like, German defense minister said it was inappropriate, which is the language, of the kindergarten. But the people of Europe, I think, hear this loud and clear. They are being treated with suspicion and contempt by their own governments for, as Vance said at CPAC, often for doing nothing more than expressing perfectly reasonable opinions, which happen to go against the official opinion of Europe's rulers. And for that, they are called, quote, far right, or they are hassled by the police, or they are even imprisoned. And I want to confirm that all of the cases that the Vice President referred to in his speech in Munich, all of these are well documented. They're not some kind of internet fantasy. It is really the case that in Britain, people have been arrested and sentenced for silent prayer within sight of an abortion clinic, for instance. That is absolutely confirmed. And so is the people who have been given long prison sentences, often for basically being rude on Twitter, as if that is a national security threat. So the decay of free speech in Europe is a real thing, and I think the Vice President is entirely right. Why should the United States subsidize massively wealthy countries whose governments act as if they do not share the core values of the U.S.?
Well, right. In many of the cases he referred to, German prosecutors confirmed in a 60 Minutes interview, they were happy to confirm the sort of government-sponsored silencing of dissent that's going on in Western European countries. In response to what Vance had to say, you've seen some movement from two-tier Keir Starmer in the UK as well as Macron, talking about increasing their defense budgets and so forth. But it was interesting. I watched an interview from a former NATO general talking about the same issue of Europeans being too comfortable resting on the largesse of Americans, and now we have this problem, even though he was not complimentary of Trump. But they recognize the problem. But he said, and it seems to me, despite some of the rhetorical positioning of Macron and Sturmer, that they still don't get it. And they're really not on the precipice of changing their posture towards providing for the common defense in Western Europe or the Western world generally.
No, and the problem is this: they can't do it overnight. I mean, as we see in the U.S. as well, rebuilding the production base so that you can actually run your own military, that takes years on its own. Even in wartime, it's a massive effort. So in peacetime, there's no urgent incentive for a government to say to people, actually, we're either going to put your taxes up or we're going to cut your subsidies and welfare in order to build up the army. And to give you an example of the degree of the rot that has occurred, at the end of the Cold War, Britain spent 7% of its GDP on its military. It is currently, having pushed the figure up, it is currently at 2.3%. And Britain is committed to go to 2.5%, but the Labour government cannot say when it will hit it or how it will fund it. So, they can say they'll do their best to sort of placate Vance, Trump, and hope the problem will go away. But this requires them to restructure their economies and their political priorities. And of course, if that is electoral suicide for a party like Labour in Britain, which is the party of welfare. And meanwhile, of course, because of the Ukraine war, Russia has put its economy on a war footing and is simply outproducing the Europeans. So we now have a gap, as it were. If the United States is withdrawing, the Europeans can say they want to step up, but they're incapable of doing it. And that, of course, does invite further Russia adventurism in Eastern Europe.
I wanted to get your take on, speaking of Eastern Europe, this war of words that has broken out between Trump and Zelensky. It seems like it is a really poor strategic move on Zelensky's part to get into this public back and forth with Trump. I mean, if if Western Europe is not going to backfill America in providing more material support to Ukraine, then Zelensky, if he repels Trump and the U.S., he could literally be a man without a country in the not too distant future.
Well, Zelensky has negotiated in public from the start. He has built a persona and done it in front of the cameras, and it worked very well. He was able to persuade the Biden administration to extend a war that had already reached a stalemate and extended even for 3 years, which is where we are now. And he is still trying to negotiate in public, this time by rallying the Europeans to his side against the Trump administration. I don't think that's going to work at all. I think that the Trump administration regards Zelensky with extreme skepticism, if I can put it that way. And the reason being, and this is something which for 4 years we were supposed to forget, Ukraine is an extremely corrupt place before the invasion of 2014, before the Russian invasion of 2022. Ukraine is a place where Russian money can come in and go out the back door because Ukraine was connected to the European Union banking system. It really is, even for Eastern Europe, outrageously corrupt. And Zelensky is a figure who has risen through that system. So the Trump administration know him for what he is. The way in which Zelensky was sort of spun into being this heroic figure is quite shocking. It is heroic, certainly, of the Ukrainians to have resisted an invasion, which is a terrible thing, absolutely. But Zelensky himself, no, he's no saint. And the way he's behaving, that will probably speed up his departure from the scene, because the Russians don't want him there. And the U.S. certainly does not, under this administration, does not want someone in Ukraine who is trying to drag the U.S. into a war with Russia, because that has been Zelensky's survival strategy.
The Biden administration made him seem like a hero. They flew out celebrities, Sean Penn, Angelina Jolie, anybody, Ben Stiller, to meet Zelensky to make him look like, hey, we're on your side. We love you. We support you. But yet he lost billions of dollars of the money we gave him. I don't know how you just lose millions and millions of dollars like that.
I can tell you, Amy, within about a year after the Biden administration started sending money, I happened to be in central London. And for the first time, I noticed large numbers, like, several in a day, of top-of-the-line Mercedes limousines with Ukrainian plates in central London. That's where a substantial chunk of the money has gone. It's gone straight out of Ukraine. There are stories also of generals being arrested at the border on their, with suitcases full of euros. If Zelensky says half the money is unaccountable, then, that's billions. And I believe 60-odd billion was sent to U.S. aid to administer. So no doubt Elon Musk will be on the case to find out where the taxpayers' money has gone.
Before we let you go, I want to pull forward this story that you did in the Free Press last month. It's an incredible story, and Elon Musk picked up on it. And just the impact that the story is having, if any, in Britain, particularly with respect to the open borders policies that the UK and the rest of Western Europe was pursuing long before America pursued it under Biden. I'm talking about this grooming and serial rape of thousands of English girls by men of mostly Pakistani Muslim background over several decades.
Yes, and it's still an ongoing phenomenon. There is every reason to believe that this, and which is, as I described, the worst organized crime in the history of Britain, and certainly in peacetime, probably the history of Europe. There is every reason to believe it's still ongoing. And the Labour government is doing its best not to do anything about it. It has, instead of announcing an open-ended national inquiry, it has announced inquiries in 5 towns. And we know that this happened in at least 50 towns. So we can do the math, and that's 45 places where the local government is completely complicit with it, where the local police have often turned a blind eye, where every level of the system is implicated, and there will be no serious inquiry. So not only will the criminals still be carrying on, but those who have enabled them, who are supposed, after all, to be protecting the weak, to be protecting children, those people are all going to be in their jobs, their state-funded jobs and pensions, and no one will, look too closely about how rotten the system has become. And the reason for that is because this is the Labour Party's voter base, a combination of state employees and recent Muslim immigrants. They're the crucial blocks the Labour Party needs in order to keep power.
Where is Kemi Badenoch and Conservatives on this? Are they trying to press the issue?
They are pressing it now. They are in opposition, but they were happy to do the same, actually, when they were in power. And so for that reason alone, Kemi Badenoch has a real credibility problem. Nobody has forgotten that the problems we have in Britain now are bipartisan. With both parties, they have both had long runs in power, and they both basically followed the same policies. We had in Britain what in the US people often call the uni-party. That, they basically agreed on about 80% of their policies, and the other 20% didn't matter too much. On this issue, which is related to immigration, assimilation, Islamism even, on these issues, this was a bipartisan mess which took 30 years to develop. And Badenoch is still very much in the shadow of it, which is why Nigel Farage and Reform are now running ahead of both Conservatives and Labour in the polls, which is an astonishing thing.
Well, I mean, thousands of girls being raped and not getting justice, and for both parties to allow that to go on because they didn't want to, endanger their posture with respect to immigration policy is just unconscionable. So I can understand why if there's a revolt going on, is sort of what you're describing.
There is a popular movement against the entire system, which has been exposed, as I've said, largely because Elon Musk finally shone a spotlight on it. And the same can be said of other things. Once the United States says what is going on, the Europeans actually then have to do something. And when they're left to their own devices, they will manage often to suppress things, as we've seen in Germany, as we've seen in Britain, because these are small societies of people who are used to being told what to do. They have a tradition of free speech, for instance, in Britain, but it's not as protected in law as under the First Amendment. And so people are used to sort of dialing it back and not rocking the boat. So what Musk did was an enormous favor. And what JD Vance did in Munich and at CPAC is also, he's doing a great favor to the people of Europe by saying, look, this is what's happening. It's not acceptable to us. Why should it be acceptable to you?
Well, Elon Musk did a great service because you did a great service with that expose. Dominic Green, columnist for the Washington Examiner, contributor to the Wall Street Journal, and fellow of the Royal Historical Society. Dominic, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
A great smile can make you feel happy and